Hello and welcome to today's episode of Uncovering Authenticity. I am Monique Bradley and I am in the studio right now with Mike Molloy, who is a lawyer, so I call him Mike Molloy. How are you going, Mike?
Yeah, good, thanks, Monique.
Good. Welcome to the studio. I know this is new and weird and different for you. My podcast is all about real people, real stories. Becoming a lawyer, I think, is a little bit like getting bitten by the acting virus and the fact that it's a bit of a calling.
Mm-hmm.
How did this happen for you?
Geez. So I guess it happened because I was a ski bum and I didn't have anything. I didn't have anything in my future which would give me the freedom to do all the things that I wanted to do. Mm. And I didn't have any ideas about how I could get to where I wanted to be, except for my dad, who's a lawyer. Mm. And that seemed like an obvious pathway. So at that point in my life, I'd been to university and I'd left and I'd gone off and traveled and that sort of thing. And I guess that I wanted to make that change. And the obvious move was to, do what he has done because it was easy to see the pathway. So then I went off to law school, and my idea at that time was I wanted to, make these sorts of changes in the world, like we were speaking about it earlier, this sort of slightly altruistic kind of thing, which maybe wasn't very genuine or maybe was a little bit idealistic and part of the whole university thing where you're like, oh, okay, we're reading these cases about, these big problems that people seem to have resolved. And so anyway, I was kind of heading in that direction. And then when I actually got through the university machine and started working, it kind of changed for me. And I guess I ended up where I am now because the reality of practicing is quite different from, my preconception of what it would be like.
So you see you've ended up working where you are now. What is that?
Basically, I'm a transactional lawyer, so I do commercial law. So I help people out with transactions, essentially. So I'm not the kind of lawyer who goes to court, or I'm not the kind of lawyer that sits in government or anything like that. I give people advice on what the law is, and I help them create their own law in the form of contracts.
Whoa, I've never heard it described as that before. Create their own law, obviously following all the legal pathways you have to follow, right?
Yeah. So I'm just talking about, when people agree to be bound by terms, essentially they're saying, look, we're going to have this arrangement between each other, which is our own little piece of private law. And if we don't follow what this law is saying, then there's going to be, repercussions. Mm. Yeah.
So my podcast is about letting people, or providing a space, not letting people, because we can let ourselves do anything, but providing a space for people to be present with their truth.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing this job and you've been doing it for a while and you'll probably continue to do it for a while longer. Why do you do that specific part of law? Why does it interest you?
I guess, I mean, there's lots of parts to it. So, it's difficult to put my finger on like a specific or a reason which covers all areas of it. But, if you broke it down into small parts, like, for example, drafting contracts. Like drafting contracts is sort of like an intellectual challenge. And that's kind of a very sort of isolated, inward-looking thing that you can go and do, and you can challenge yourself personally. And that's, for me, I think I like intellectual stimulation. So it's like a good, so it's an easy space for me to be in and feel happy.
So it fuels you.
Yeah, that would fuel me. So that's like one facet of the job, which is great for me. But then there's also like this side of it, which is helping people out, dealing with people's problems, having people rely on you and to trust you, like we were talking about earlier. So that, you know, those things give me a massive kick. And, you know, you can get that in other areas of law. But the cool thing about being a transactional guy is that, you know, you have these like long-standing relationships with clients where they keep coming back to you. You keep building up the rapport. And, you know, ideally you end up in this position where you're sort of just going to work on interesting stuff, and you're talking to your mates. And then at the end of it, you send your mate a bill and he pays you.
Wow. Living the dream, really.
So that's pretty good, I guess. Yeah. Maybe that's sugarcoating it a little bit, but you know, I mean, I think for me, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, why I'm doing transactional law. Yeah.
So from my work in what I do, obviously, and I've talked to you about this before, a lot of the work that I do is understanding personas, personalities, the science of the brain, how the brain governs how we show up effectively. And I understand that in the brain, there's the informational analytical side of the brain, and yet you're talking people. Those are two completely opposite sides of the brain functioning together.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, it is. It is. So are you naturally more analytically minded because you know the law? Because that's what I think of when I think of law. This is my perception of law, is it's about data and details, but you speak the language of people. How do those two worlds work together in your brain? It's a big question, eh?
Yeah. I mean, in my brain, I don't really know. I guess it just happens, right? Like I would guess that like me personally, I'm probably more analytical, or at least I started more analytical. And then I've over time sort of, not sure whether I just naturally have evolved or whether it's through like intentionally doing it, probably a bit of both. I've like developed that side of practicing. And, you know, to be a private practice lawyer, you have to be good at dealing with people. Like that's actually, you know, they don't teach you that at law school, but it's probably the most important thing. If you want to go and, you know, you want to work for government and you want to write policy, you know, of course, you're still going to have to interact with people and make sure that the policy machine moves and you've been a team and that sort of thing. But in terms of like actually impressing people, having people trust you, developing relationships, if you can't do that in private practice, then you'll never be able to generate revenue. You'll never have a legitimate business. So the advice is helpful, but what you really need is relationships with people. So
interesting. And one of the words that's come up quite a few times already in the chat is this concept of trust. Trust is such a every person has a different perception of what trust means based on maybe their upbringing, their cultural beliefs, as an example. And obviously it's important in law, because if you're going into bat for a client in a transactional court case, there has to be that trust with the client that you've got their best interests at heart. But as part of that trust in yourself as the lawyer, that you're here to do what's right and that you know you've got this. Like, how much of that does the self-trust come into play? And again, I'm asking you big questions tonight.
These are big questions.
You've got to back yourself,
You've got to
right?
back yourself. And, you know, everyone, you know, there's that advice, fake it till you make it, which is good advice, but it's also, it's advice which shouldn't be adopted, you know, without some caution. And so I think, you got to know how much you can, you know, how much you can just sort of back yourself, and then also when it's appropriate to to say, hey, look, there's uncertainty here. I need to go away and have a look at this. I mean, I think it's kind of circular, right? Like if you have trust, then with the person, then you don't need to know, the answer, or you don't need to be able to get it right immediately. Trust is about being able to find out. It's more about people being able to rely on you to get it right, and that you'll make the call at the appropriate time. You're not very useful to people if you just sort of always shoot from the hip and you're not getting it right. So it's a balancing act, I suppose. But certainly the trust is essential. You need to have it in order to be able to do the job well. And I think that building it is hard, and it takes the key element is it takes time, and you have to get compounding wins on the board with someone. And the more wins you get, the more trust there is. And then, with that trust, you can also weather the storm when there are losses. So there's a sort of, it's like any relationship. It's just time spent, and to an extent, lawyering is about, or your start in lawyering is having people take a chance on you. And when people take a chance on you, you have to perform for them. That's the key thing, right? Like treat anyone who has trust in you, treat them like gold. And then, you get that snowball effect.
I love that. It's no different from the world that I'm in. As a performer, it's exactly the same thing. If a client books me as an MC or a speaker or performer of any kind, I have to deliver because I want them to look as good as possible. I want them to get those outcomes that they've booked me for. There's a huge amount of trust that happens in the work that I do. And it was the same with TV shopping as well. I wanted viewers to trust me so that if I recommended a product, they knew they could trust my word. So, it's so interesting that our worlds are very different, but those same qualities are actually very much the same, which are, I guess, a part of human nature, right?
Is there and how would you? I mean, at your end, what do you do to or how do you see that sort of trade-off between being knowledgeable, projecting, I guess, ability, but then also not, being human, not being possible for you to actually be able to do everything, at least not straight away. Like, what's your kind of take on that? There's that trade-off there around, I guess, like risk and how much you can back yourself to pull something off, and even though there might be uncertainty.
I just back myself on everything. But then I'm, twice your age? So I've got a few more runs on the board. Yeah. I think, and probably like you highlighted, great question, like you highlighted before, and that's what these chats are about. I've had a lot of wins. I've had a few losses. My upbringing, because you were talking about your dad before, my dad was a huge influence in the work that I do as well. And my father taught me, look back to learn, look forward to succeed. And so that's kind of how I operate all the time. I'm constantly in this state of self-reflection and then self-projection.
Right.
So it's a dance for me. But I know that's not everybody's practice, but that seems to work for me, so that I'm constantly monitoring my progress, I think. So
yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting dialect. Thank you for asking the question. No, you're the first person I think I've ever interviewed that's actually asked me a question mid chat, which is really cool. No, it's good. It's good. This is what this is supposed to be about. So transactional, I always think of that term as in sales as an example, because I come from a sales background as well. We have the 3 F's of sales: find them, F them, forget them, which is a very transactional way of approaching a client. But you're talking about the relationship with the client.
Yeah.
So how do you make transactional a sustainable solution in business?
You're going to have to expand on that. So do you for me, sorry?
Like, I think transactional is kind of one-off and you're done.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess maybe, I mean, that is the case. Sometimes it's like that. But you can also think about it like, when I say transactional, what I'm doing is I'm advising people on a transaction that they're undertaking. I'm not selling them something. I mean, I'm selling them my services to do that, right? But I don't mean the transaction that I'm providing to them. Like it's not the sale of my services. It's they're taking on a transaction and I'm helping them out with it. And you know, businesses usually take on lots of transactions. So that's how we get, I guess that's where the repeat business comes from. That's where you get to develop the relationship. And also if you are not too specialized and you have a few different areas of practice, then, you know, like for example, I might help clients out with, you know, a property portfolio that they have, but then I also might be doing their personal asset planning work at the same time. So you end up sort of, you know, helping them out with some, you know, they're all transactions, but they're a broad variety of transactions in their lives. So that's one of the ways that you can sort of get that repeat business going.
And in an advisory space, it's quite hard to say. In an advisory space, do you find there's a lot of pressure on you to always have that right opinion? I know you were mentioning before it's, you know, about the importance of researching that right opinion. You're providing a lot of advice for people. How do you deal? Because I don't know how your brain works and how your business works. How do you deal with that pressure? Or do you just
Cycling
know it's right? Cycling.
You know, for the pressure, for you know, stress and stuff like that. But to get it right, you need to have, ideally you have a team of people. So, you know, it's always good to bounce ideas off other people. And then ultimately, if you can't make a solid call, then you're an advisor. So you really have to tell the client that, right? You have to tell them that there's uncertainty. And you know, it's not enough to just say, oh, it's uncertain, we don't know. You know, you still have to put forward what the, you know, two different ways of looking at it or whatever it might be, and give the client as much information as you can to assist them to make the call. But ultimately, if you're unsure, you shouldn't really make that call for the client. It should be for them to make. It's their decision. Yeah. I mean, you got to support them, right? And you've got to, you know, this is an interesting space because sometimes what you need to do in that, and this is why experience is actually really valuable, is sometimes, in fact, often there's uncertainty in business, right? In transactions, there'll be uncertainty, and someone who's really experienced will have sort of a sense of what the right thing to do is, right? That's not, you know, you don't get taught that in law school or anything like that, but you just sort of have your commercial nous, and you can rely on that commercial nous. But the key thing is you can't misrepresent to the client that that's legal advice. You need to say, hey, look, this is what I think, or this is what I would do. And so traditionally, some lawyers probably wouldn't do that, right? But I think if you have a good relationship and you have trust with someone, then you probably can, and you probably should if you want to be a really good lawyer.
That's so good. This topic of trust keeps coming through in everything that you say. I find it so interesting. So what does trust mean for you?
It just means that people are happy to rely on you. They can give you something and they can rely on you to do it.
And what do you think it takes to build that?
It takes time. Yeah, it just takes a lot of time and experience dealing with the person and slowly allowing them to give you more and more trust, right? And not stuffing it up when they give it to you.
I love it. Okay, so finally, big question. What is your definition of authentic success?
Authentic success.
So I'm not talking about just business success, but authentic, like the feeling of, yes, I've landed, I'm home, I am successful. What is that for you?
Well, there's that immediate kind of, maybe it's not the feeling of success, but there's an immediate kind of endorphin rush that you can sometimes get. Like, I don't know, you've probably had like a high after something where maybe you're walking home or something, you have that little moment to yourself. So that's probably an immediate feeling of success. But that long-term kind of sense of success, I'm not sure. I'll tell you about it when I'm feeling it, I
when
guess.
you're aware of it.
But yeah, the small battles, I feel it. But I don't know. I think that I'm, one of the risks of being too focused on having achieved success is that maybe you become a little bit complacent. I know you should celebrate your wins and all that, but at the risk of becoming too complacent, I can't give you a straight answer on long-term success. But I'll let you know when I get there.
I love it. Mike Molloy, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. That's been insightful and amazing, and I wish you every success for the future.
Thanks, Monique.
Thank you.